Celebrating the Miles Davis Centennial over the next 100 days, we are Miles 100 Radio, KSDS San Diego.
Once again, here's your boy, Symphony Sid.
And once again, ladies and gentlemen, we take you back to the Royal Roost, Metropolitan Opera House, where you sit back and relax every night, every morning, and listen to a lot of the wonderful and modern jazz that I hope you really enjoy. And don't forget, here at the Royal Roost, we're bringing to you, starting the 7th, the great Dinah Washington, and on the 9th, the great Count Basie and his wonderful organization. It'll be Count Basie, Dinah Washington, and the great Miles Davis organization. And as our surprise for this morning here on the all-night, all-frantic one, with our microphones down here at the Royal Roost, we bring to you once again the wonderful and outstanding Charlie Parker and his wonderful organization. That's right. For the weekend, ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing you the great Charlie Parker and his wonderful organization, featuring Miles Davis on trumpet, Max Roach on drums, Tad Dameron on piano, and Curly Russell on bass. I know that you'll have a lot of fun over the weekend. Come on down and dig the great Charlie Parker, the one and only, the man of jazz. And to start things jumping off, let's hear an original done by, or written by, Thelonious Monk out of the RCA Victor album. Here's 52nd Street Theme.
That's 52nd Street theme from the Royal Roost. And the Royal Roost from September 4th, 1948, with Charlie Parker's quintet with Miles Davis on trumpet, Tad Dameron piano, Curly Russell bass, and Max Roach on drums here on Miles 100 Radio. And at noon, we kick off our daily feature, our daily sketches of Miles. We are celebrating the Miles Davis centennial all summer long. And KSDS has now become Miles 100 Radio for the summer, and we're doing these special sketches of Miles Davis every day at noon. A variety of different KSDS hosts will be presenting the material each day, as well as several guest hosts. As a matter of fact, I hope you got a chance to hear our first guest host last week, which was the great jazz pianist Eric Reed. And Eric did such a marvelous job last week, and Eric will be doing more of these shows coming up. You're not going to want to miss any of them every day at noon. Sketches of Miles. And we're kind of going along somewhat chronologically. Last week, we finished up with Miles Davis in 1947, which was mostly Miles Davis as part of Charlie Parker's quintet. And at this point, in 1948, he's still part of the Miles Davis Quintet, but also taking part in a lot of jam sessions all over town. And as a matter of fact, taking part in a lot of the jam sessions that happened at the Royal Roost. And Bird at the Roost is our feature today for Sketches of Miles, because luckily several of the Royal Roost broadcasts were captured by Boris Rose. And Boris Rose, kind of an amateur recordist, if you will, from that time period, is responsible historically for so much incredible material that he recorded off the air. And in this case, either recorded these off the air or had an inside at the Royal Roost where he was able to get them directly from the board, which kind of sounds like more of the case. But either way, Boris Rose was able to preserve this material. So we get a chance to hear Miles Davis as part of Charlie Parker's quintet at the Royal Roost. The Royal Roost was located at 1580 Broadway in New York, which was between 47th and 48th Street. And it was right across from the Strand Theater. It had originally been a fried chicken restaurant for a number of years, and in March of 1946 was taken over by Ralph Watkins and Morris Levy. And Ralph Watkins had been, Ralph Watkins was one of the owners of Kelly's Stables, one of the important 52nd Street clubs. Morris Levy was young at the time, but Morris Levy would become most well known for being one of the principals of Birdland a little bit later on. But the Royal Roost preceded Birdland, also preceded Bop City, of which Ralph Watkins was also a major part of. And it was in 1947 that they not only had taken over, but they purchased the Royal Roost, and the Royal Chicken Roost, as they had called it, and then it becomes the Royal Roost. And in April of 1948, it becomes really kind of becomes a jazz club full-time at that point and decides to focus on modern jazz. And one of the reasons that focus came into play was two other gentlemen that come into being a major part of the Royal Roost. One was Monty Kaye. And Monty Kaye, very, very important, had been working and running some of the 52nd Street locations, but then became the artistic director at the Royal Roost. And then Symphony Sid Torin, the disc jockey. And Symphony Sid and Monty Kaye started to present bop concerts on Tuesdays in April of 1948. And they were very, very successful because there really wasn't anywhere else in New York presenting modern jazz on a full-time basis. Eventually it became 2 nights a week, and then eventually 7 nights a week. And a lot of these jam sessions, these bop sessions put on by Symphony Sid and Monty Kaye, Miles Davis was there, sitting in as much as possible. And in April, Symphony Sid started to do broadcasts over WMCA. They were late at night. Record shows that also then would go to the stage and do some of the live broadcast of whoever was happened to be playing at the Royal Roost, and the all-night, all-frantic one comes into play. Before long, the Royal Roost becomes known as the house that Bop built, also known as the Metropolitan Bopera House. September 4th of 1948, Charlie Parker's Quintet was one of 3 organizations, as Symphony Sid would have called them, that were taking part in the festivities. Labor Day weekend, Charlie Parker's Quintet were guests that Labor Day weekend that also featured kind of the house band Tad Dameron and also Miles Davis premiering his new group, which we'll be getting to shortly. But Charlie Parker's quintet, as we just heard, September 4th, 1948, with Miles Davis at the Royal Roost. Let's go ahead and hear the rest of that initial September 1948 broadcast, and then we'll hear more of Miles Davis from the Royal Roost in New York. Back to Symphony Sid.
And there you go, the great Charlie Parker, the bird himself and his organization. If you don't come down to the Roost over the weekend, over this wonderful Labor Day weekend, you're going to miss a treat. The great Charlie Parker and his all-stars with Miles Davis and the rest of the boys. I know you're going to have a gang of fun. And right now, here's a very favorite one that you call for all the time on the all-night, all-frantic one, the Symphony Sid Show, Coco. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the great Charlie Parker and the All-Stars with Max Roach, Miles Davis, Tad Dameron, Curly Russell, and the wonderful organization down here at the Royal Roost, our special guests. And don't forget to fall by over the weekend, this wonderful Labor Day weekend, and you'll have a ball digging some of the garnest and modern jazz. And right now, once again, ladies and gentlemen, we take you back to the all-night, all-frantic one, right to the studio, and here's Bob Garrity.
You're listening to Miles 100 Radio, and you're hearing sketches of Miles. Today, it's the Royal Roost. Miles Davis at the Royal Roost, the house that Bop built, the Metropolitan Bopera House, and there you heard an actual broadcast, Symphony Sid, and Charlie Parker's quintet featuring Miles Davis. And interestingly, they're doing Coco, based on the Changes of Cherokee, and that famous Coco from Charlie Parker's first recording session, November of 1945, where Miles was on the session, but Dizzy Gillespie had to play trumpet on Coco because Miles it was a little advanced at that point. Well, what a difference 3 years make, because now in 1948, Miles having no trouble with Coco whatsoever, and that a regular part of Charlie Parker's working book at the time that we get a chance to hear live from the Royal Roost. And always great to hear these live recordings, because where there were the restrictions, the 3 minute restrictions on a 78 RPM recording. At the Royal Roost, there were no time restrictions necessarily, and so a little bit more stretching out could be done, and that's one of the beauties of these live recordings. Well, as I'd mentioned, on Labor Day weekend, Charlie Parker's quintet had been added as a guest to the Tad Dameron group, as well as Miles Davis's brand new no-net, if you will, that we now think of as the Birth of the Cool. Now, tomorrow, we're going to be featuring the Birth of the Cool on Sketches of Miles, so you'll get the whole story tomorrow of Birth of the Cool, but we don't want to leave it out today. You'll hear more from the Royal Roost tomorrow, but we want to at least include something from the Royal Roost because that is where Miles Davis took his no-net that becomes the Birth of the Cool. And the no-net was something that, interestingly enough, that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that Miles was there that night playing with Charlie Parker, then had to go be the lead voice on these Birth of the Cool arrangements done by Jerry Mulligan and John Lewis and Gil Evans. And this is the result of that experimentation that took place at Gil Evans' apartment, that Miles was able to get them booked into the Royal Roost. Monty Kay put them into the Royal Roost, and they only did a couple of weeks, and luckily a couple of those weeks survive where we get a chance to hear a couple of the broadcasts. We're just going to hear a portion of one, but just for fun, I'm going to include something else. You know, a lot of times, these have come out through the years in a variety of different ways. A number of bootleg recordings, a number of official recordings, both on LP and on CD. But to get a bigger picture of the broadcast, since we're radio and since this is Sketches of Miles, I thought it might be fun to include a little bit more of the broadcast, including one of the commercials, which was for Snow White makeup, I think. But it's kind of funny because when Symphony Sid would do the reads of these commercials, he's doing it in his hipster voice and Fall By and The Gonest and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into just one track from the September 4th, what we now think of as the Birth of the Cool, but it starts with the patter in the studio before they throw it back to the stage. So here we go. September 4th, 1948.
Every Saturday morning, it's the same deal that comes to you direct from the Metropolitan Opera House, the Royal Roost nightclub, right on Broadway between 47th and 48th Streets. And during the last half hour this morning, from 3:30 until 4, we're going to hear from Miles Davis and his 9-piece jazz group with a few new sounds in modern jazz, a group that just opened there this morning. Right now, though, Sid would like to talk to you about that product, Snow White.
Collection been singing the hot weather blues these days. Face powder cake or disappear, nose shiny. Well, that's a fine how do you do. After all, I've been telling you about Snow White face powder, the kind that can cake, the kind that clings for hours. And haven't I told you that a box costs only a quarter? Well, how come you haven't tried it? Get hip, get straight, won't you? Snow White has it all over ordinary face powders because it's designed especially for the kind of skin that you'd like. It comes in special shades for dark brown complexions and even very light cream color tones, too. And remember, you get your choice of 5 different shades. You get to pick out the one that does the very most for you. And remember, when you use it, you get the kind of soft, becoming makeup that makes men take a second glance, why, even a third. So don't fool around with face powders that aren't designed for you. Get Snow White. Be radiant, be lovely, be gone. Beautiful, that's what I'm talking about. And remember, a box of Snow White face powder costs a mere 25 cents at your favorite drugstore. Try it soon, and try the other fine Snow White beauty products, too. Snow White, like with the 7 Dwarfs, that's the name you can count on for beauty.
Naturally, we can't play records when it's a live broadcast. You see? So we can get it for you after 4. Okay. Right. Thanks a lot for calling. Don't forget to call Circle 62500 for your requests. Well, the best deal to do is not to call now, but to wait until 4:03, guess the Gone Side, and then call. If you've guessed the Gone Side, we'll play your request between 4 and 5 o'clock. Just a short reminder that this Symphony Sid show with music recorded is coming to you over America's leading independent station, WMCA, first on your dial, New York. And now, Well, let's get back down there on Broadway where things are really jumping. Back to the Metropolitan Opera House, the Royal Roost nightclub. Once again, here's your boy, Symphony Sid.
And right now, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Royal Roost, with the lights low, the music with that gone groove, right here at 1580 Broadway between 47th and 48th Streets. It's right opposite the Strand Theater, where you can sit back and relax and dig some of the wonderful things. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you something new in modern music. We bring you impressions in modern music with the great Miles Davis and his wonderful new organization, featuring Max Roach on drums, John Lewis on piano, Al McKibben on bass, Lee Conant on alto, Jerry Mulligan on baritone. You all remember Jerry for the disc jockey jump that he did with Gene Krupa in the band. Bill Barber on tuba. That's right, Bill Barber on tuba, Junior Collins on French horn, and Mike Zwerin on trombone. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big hand for something new in modern jazz. Ladies and gentlemen, the Miles Davis Organization, as they do for you a John Lewis arrangement, their first tune, a thing called Move.
that's the way, unfortunately, the original recording cuts off there, so with that one piece. But nevertheless, there, Miles Davis's No Net, and the group that we would now think of as the Birth of the Cool, but their beginnings at the Royal Roost. And that coming from September 4th, 1948, and one of the few performances that took place at the Royal Roost that luckily, nothing might have ever come from it had Pete Rugolo not been in the audience. But Pete Rugolo, Stan Kenton had broken up his orchestra at that time, and the different musicians went their different ways. Pete Rugolo ended up in New York working for Capitol Records. And Pete arranged for Capitol and did classic things for Nat King Cole at that time and Peggy Lee and a host of others, but also was hired to bring modern jazz to Capitol by signing groups and being the A&R director and producer and recording modern jazz for Capitol Records. And Pete Rugolo happened to be in the audience one night and heard this Miles Davis No Net and was blown away by the arrangements, blown away by the idea of it, and signed them for Capitol Records. And that's why they end up getting an opportunity to do 3 sessions for Capitol that ended up coming out in 1949, 1950 for the most part. So that's the sequence of what happens. And tomorrow we'll take you through that on Sketches of Miles because we'll focus on the Birth of the Cool. And if you really want deep information about the Birth of the Cool, Saturday mornings, we started last week kind of a deep dive into the Birth of the Cool and beyond that will go much deeper into the effect that the Birth of the Cool has had and who it's had effects on and the different recordings and different artists and arrangers and so on. So that will continue Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. and that'll continue for a while during our special Miles 100 radio, our Summer of Miles Davis. And we're going to continue now. We just heard a little of the Birth of the Cool. Well, there was kind of a subset of the All-Star No Net, or I should say the No Net, kind of an all-star subset of the No Net that also was booked at the Roost that played during the time that the No Net was playing there. And that was made up of Miles Davis on trumpet as the leader, Lee Konitz, who was the alto player with the Birth of the Cool, and Lee was on alto, John Lewis, the pianist, Curly Russell, Max Roach, all part of the all-star quintet that worked the Royal Roost there in the latter part of September of 1948. And luckily, some of the Boris Rose recordings include a few sides recorded by the quintet, these coming from September 25th, 1948. Miles Davis and Lee Konitz on the front line, and from it, here is Miles's composition, Half Nelson.
Thank you.
There's Miles Davis's group with Lee Konitz, a small group, if you will, out of the No Net, and that particular group working the Royal Roost and captured September 25th, 1948, with Miles's composition Half Nelson, with Lee Konitz on alto, John Lewis, Curly Russell, Max Roach. The rhythm section, the vocalist Kenny Haygood, who also did a couple of vocal things with the Birth of the Cool ensemble. Kenny Haygood was on that date as well. And so Miles Davis working the Royal Roost, that's our feature today on Sketches of Miles. And Miles working at the Royal Roost and getting kind of towards the end of his tenure now with Charlie Parker. There are some dates from December of 1948 that were captured that we're going to hear from each of them, the first being December 11th. And December 11th, I imagine Symphony Sid's going to repeat this, but nevertheless, it's Bird, Miles Davis, Al Haig, Tommy Potter, and Max Roach. And December 11th was the beginning, more or less, of a long stretch for Charlie Parker at the Royal Roost. December 11th was the first of a number of weekly broadcasts. Bird went in with his quintet for a 4-month engagement that started on December 9th and would go through March 12th, but Miles wouldn't last that entire time. Miles was done by the end of December, so as far as working with Bird at that particular time period. But we do have December 11th, December 12th, and December 18th from the Royal Roost, and we got about 20 minutes left on our Sketches of Miles, so we'll squeeze a few of those in so that we can hear more from the Royal Roost. So again, at 1 o'clock, Larry Murray will be in as normal, and you'll have Count Basie and the 1 o'clock jump coming along. Also, be sure and tune in every day at noon to catch these special Sketches of Miles. Tomorrow will be more about the Birth of the Cool. But we're going to go to December 11th, 1948. Once again, we'll go back to hear from Symphony Sid right after this.
Listen. You're listening to Miles 100 Radio, your source for all things jazz and all things Miles. San Diego's Jazz 88.3.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take our WMCA microphone. Without wasting too much time, bringing you here at the Metropolitan Opera House, we bring you the great bird, Charlie Parker. Let's give Charlie a great big hand. Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker on alto, Miles Davis on trumpet, Tommy Potter on bass, and the great Max Roach on drums. To start things jumping without wasting too much time, the bird, grooving high.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to a Sunday evening concert series emanating from the Royal Roost, the house that Bop built. And up on the podium comes that leading exponent of progressive jazz, famous alto sax man, one Charlie Parker. Let's bring him on with a big hand, shall we? Here he is, smiling and ready to go. All the boys of the band are here, Charlie, so suppose we get going and make this a hot house, shall we?
There's Charlie Parker and the Quintet with Miles Davis from the Royal Roost, right there on Broadway between 47th and 48th Street. December 12th, 1948 with Hot House. Before that, from the night before, I should say, December 11th, 1948, and Groovin' High. Now, realistically, these things were happening, real early in the morning. So I think the dates got screwed up a lot because of that, because, it would be, 1 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and I think sometimes the dates got a little confused, but it's the roughly the correct date, I think, within a few days, within a couple of days. Either way, December 11th and 12th, 1948, Charlie Parker's Quintet from the Royal Roost. A lot of the great photographs of that era happened at the Royal Roost because Herman Leonard, who was on the scene at the time taking photographs, shot a lot of those classic Herman Leonard jazz portraits at the Royal Roost. And you can always tell because the Royal Roost, there was like a fake tree. I mean, it was a basement club in New York, but there was a fake tree with a bunch of leaves on it that was there on the bandstand. And you can often see kind of leaves in the background of some of the Herman Leonard photos, and you always know it's the Royal Roost. But a lot of Herman Leonard's things are from the Royal Roost, and a lot of the great classic photographs. Well, I mentioned December 18th being the last of what we have in terms of Miles Davis with Charlie Parker from this time period, because not long after that was that first breakup with Miles Davis and Charlie Parker. Not this particular date, but within a few days after that, Miles got mad and stormed off the bandstand. And that's when he famously said that Bird makes you feel about 1 foot high. And he was replaced by Kenny Durham. So Kenny Durham becomes the trumpet player with Charlie Parker's quintet, and Miles continues on his own. And so Bird continues at the Roost all the way through the spring of 1949, and Miles is doing other things. Now, Miles would be back at the Roost to perform with Tad Dameron's Tintet, and this week, Paul Combs, the author of Dameronia, Paul Combs will be a special guest host, bringing you the Miles Davis Tad Dameron material, some of which emanate from the Royal Roost. So that'll be happening this week. And then tomorrow we'll go a little deeper into the Birth of the Cool from the Royal Roost as well as Capitol Records. So all those things on tap for sketches of Miles. We'll finish up by hearing a couple things from December 18th. And like I said, this is from the Royal Roost, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, some of the last things before Miles got mad and walked off the bandstand. So we'll finish with a couple things going back to the bandstand, starting with that Jumping with Symphony Sid theme and going into Chasing the Bird. So here is Symphony Sid.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, with our theme Jumping with Symphony Sid, we take our WMCA microphones right down here to the Royal Roost, the Metropolitan Opera House, the original house that Bob built here on Broadway between 47th and 48th Street, and bring you the garnest in modern progressive jazz. A lot of the wonderful things that we talk about every night on the All Night All Frantic One. So sit back and relax, and for the next hour or so, I know that you'll have a lot of wonderful, wonderful times on the All Night All Frantic One, the Symphony Sid Show over at WMCA. And don't forget, this is the morning when we take our WMCA microphones right down to the Royal Roost. And if you haven't got anything to do over the weekend, come on down and have a gang of fun. And to start things jumping, I'd like to introduce you to the Sensational Bird Organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Parker on alto, Miles Davis on trumpet, Tommy Potter on bass, Max Roach on drums, and Al Haig on piano. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a great big hand. Come on, everybody, a great big hand. And to start things jumping without wasting too much time, I know that you're ready to have that wonderful time, and here he is, Charlie Parker, the All-Stars, Chasing the Bird. so, ladies and gentlemen, that's the great Charlie Parker. You know, it's a very funny thing. In this little group of only 5 gentlemen, we have 2 great poll winners on our jazz poll, both Charlie Parker and the wonderful Max Roach on drums. And those are the 2 gentlemen who will have as our guests, remember, Christmas night over at Carnegie Hall as we present the most sensational and wonderful concert ever held in exciting modern progressive jazz. That's the 25th of this month, Saturday night. It's next week. We hope that everybody will fall by and dig everybody, the great Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker. Everybody's going to be there. Remember, tickets are available at the Carnegie Hall box office and right back there at the box office of the Royal Roost. And now in the relaxed groove, ladies and gentlemen, let's dig the bird as he does out of nowhere.